Hey, this is Cedric Youngelman, your host of the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. Today's episode with Luke Dashjr, CEO of Ocean, the new pool on the block, in which we discuss the current state of mining, the ingenious nature of the latest spam wave attacks, if there's an existential threat to Bitcoin, and whether we're in a civil war already or eventually headed for one, is brought to you by River, the preferred choice for buying Bitcoin. Why do I recommend River? Because I personally use the service, and they offer zero fees on recurring Bitcoin purchases. You can dollar cost average hourly, daily, weekly, or monthly. Every Bitcoin is stored in a one-to-one multi-sig cold storage, meaning your assets are always accessible. Plus, with US-based phone support, help is just a call away. They also have this cool feature called Riverlink, which allows you to send Bitcoin via text to anyone, which can be claimed to any wallet. River makes it simple and secure to save your wealth in Bitcoin. Get up to $100 when you sign up and buy Bitcoin and River at river.com/matrix. And now, let's enter the Bitcoin Matrix with Luke Dashjr for this fascinating and informative conversation centered around his new decentralized mining pool, Ocean.
What is real? How do you define real?
You can't jump into cash. Cash is trash. What do? You get out.
Luke Dashjr is a Bitcoin core developer and the founder of Ocean Mining Pool. He has made over 200 contributions to Bitcoin Core and maintains the Bitcoin Improvement Proposals section on GitHub. He is one of the world's most prolific free software and Bitcoin developers. Luke's career as a developer began in 2001. Luke Dashjr was one of the first to detect a Bitcoin hard fork in 2013 due to a software bug in Bitcoin. The nodes that upgraded to Bitcoin version 0.8 triggered a bug that led to an accidental hard fork. Luke's detection and fast team action prevented the network or protocol from falling completely. He has been a Gen 2 user for over 17 years, making him extremely knowledgeable about operating systems. His main contributions in this community are aimed at the optimization and security of systems. He is a cybersecurity extremist. In fact, he thinks that Bitcoin in its current network state has security weaknesses because its network is not yet fully decentralized. For this reason, he invites everyone who uses Bitcoin to install their own full node. Luke Dashjr is a community-supported Bitcoin developer working on Bitcoin Core and many other parts of Bitcoin. You can help fund his important public Bitcoin work by sending him sats directly or on GitHub sponsors or on his Patreon. Luke is a Roman Catholic husband, father of 10, Bitcoin Core developer, and CTO of Ocean Mining. He believes the pedos that took over Vatican City are not Roman Catholic. Luke Dashjr, welcome to the Bitcoin Matrix podcast. How are you?
Okay.
Well, it's great to have you here. What's going on with Ocean seems to be gathering a lot of attention for, maybe a pool that doesn't have a lot of hash rate yet. Myself, I'm small disclosure. I'm actually a small time investor in Ocean. I made a small allocation. I went to the launch, both to cover it as a podcaster and to see it for myself as an investor. And, we'll get into, I think, the launch and Ocean a bit, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about maybe your backstory or your rabbit hole story, if you could share that with us.
Someone first introduced me to Bitcoin at the end of 2010. It was a week later in 2011 that I submitted my first patch. Just pretty much dove right in and been developing Bitcoin for a long time since then. Started Ocean last year because of how centralized the mining industry has become. It's not just that there's few miners. I mean, there's a lot of miners still, but everyone's using the same 2 or 3 pools. And so you mentioned Ocean's gotten a lot of attention despite its small size. That's because we're aiming to decentralize mining and kind of disrupt that monopoly.
Maybe we can get into that in a bit for sure. But But a lot of people dismiss Bitcoin 1, 2, or 3 times even, before they even maybe buy some sats or look at an exchange or read an article. What maybe made you start looking at it or doing stuff with it right away? Or do you remember anything about that time period?
Yeah. Yeah, back then it wasn't, the outlook was very different. It wasn't as obviously essential as it is today. Fiat hadn't started its collapse yet and was largely functional like US dollar. But back then it was the technology, the potential to be kind of a nerdy thing, a tonal number system currency that got me into it and drew my attention. And it was only probably not until 2019, 2020 that it became what it is today in my mind.
Really? It kind of took that long, and even constantly working on it to kind of see it as something more essential.
Right. I mean, it's always been a fun project to work on, and the technology is a developing area. There hasn't really been any consensus systems like Bitcoin before, even aside from the whole monetary aspect of it. And so that really held my attention for the first several years. And I don't think it was really until the money printer started going crazy that it became such a crucial piece of infrastructure for the future. Of course, always wanted like Bitcoin to grow and get adopted, but it was kind of still an experiment. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. But now it's become, we have to make it work one way or the other. There isn't really a failure option anymore.
Right. There's no plan B. I emphatically agree. One thing I think about it, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie Good Will Hunting, but there's, well, he's a very smart guy, a virtuoso, and there's a lot of things he could do well. Maybe not everything though, but at one point someone asked him, like, how can you do all these things so well? And, he explains, you could just put me in front of a piano and I could just play. And I can't explain it to you, but he could just play. And the way I'm relating to that, I think with Bitcoin, is there certain aspects that, after you put in some work, or even maybe you see certain things right away, maybe the technology, maybe some people see the monetary aspects of it. But for myself, like similar to yours, I think it's a long journey. I'm putting in a lot of work, and there are revelations and epiphanies along the way that maybe are unexpected. And
completely, even despite having worked on it for so long, there are a lot of things I see that other people might not. But even now, I think there's still a lot for me to learn. Even I don't know that we're going to be done learning for a few decades still.
Right. So there's blind spots, and there's sort of that learning curve for the individual. So Ocean has been a huge learning curve for me. Bob Burnett came on the show over a year now, and we talked about, the rabbits and the horses and the elephants in the mining industry, and sort of Satoshi's heel, and the aglap, sort of a lot of mining being in one sort of place. And I got involved in mining through Bob, and Bob brought me into Ocean. And I start, it's like a whole different way of looking at Bitcoin. Maybe at first you look at it sort of, maybe for myself, it was about monetary policy in a lot of ways, or even speculation in the beginning, come for the gains and you stay for the money kind of thing. But then for me, learning about the tech and cryptography, that's different. But thinking about it probably more as a node runner, for my first epoch or two. And then thinking about it, as someone who's invested in a small mining farm, you start putting on that mining hat, and you start thinking about it in a very different way, and the different threat matrix, or the different advantages or pros and cons. Then looking at pools and decentralized mining, mining pools was a whole different way of looking at the mining hat, or putting, it was like, wow, I had the mining hat, but I didn't have these goggles on, So I want to talk about, why you started Ocean. You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but you mentioned sort of maybe there's a monopoly, and maybe we can get a little bit more and unpack, but maybe let's go back to Ocean V1. And maybe you could tell that story of Ocean V1, the original name, and what happened there, and then we'll kind of get into maybe Ocean V2.
Sure. Yeah. So I've submitted my first patch to Bitcoin back in January 2011. It was a few months later. January was maybe a few months after Slush had started the very first mining pool and developed that concept. It was a few months later after that I was still able to mine, but the difficulty was slowly getting up there to where I might not be able to mine on my own. So I launched the pool name was Eligius at the time. It went maybe a week just with no name at all, but eventually became known as Eligius. Unique things is it generated the coins to the miners mining on it, so there was it was a non-custodial pool from the very start. And grew from there, I guess.
How big
did a
did
lot
it
of
get?
experiments, did a lot of innovation over the years, but I don't recall how big it got, but it got pretty sizable. Probably, I don't know, was it 30% of the network at one point? I don't recall.
And so how did it go from 30% to maybe, I don't know if it's that version maybe went to 0?
I'm largely moved on. I passed the pool on to another guy called Jason. Went back to just coding because that was more productive use of my time, really, and let him run it for a few years. And he had some personal life issues, so had to stop running it eventually. And that was more or less how it ended for the time being.
Got it. Yeah, no, it's interesting. So maybe fast forward a bit. You're working on Bitcoin, various parts of Bitcoin, some other projects. Why are you inspired, or what made you start Ocean V2?
I wouldn't say it was just a single moment. It's just the mining situation has been developing for years. There was the whole ASIC boost fiasco around when SegWit activated. Bitmain and some other people had figured out a way to break the SHA-2 mining algorithm. And so back then it was already an issue. Some of the competitors to Bitmain were put out of business because they didn't know about this vulnerability in SHA-2. And so that's where Bitmain's grown their monopoly from. After a few years, it became obvious that even though SHA-2 was broken, the community wasn't going to change to a different algorithm. We had hoped, the argument was, as long as everyone adopts this algorithm, it can become competitive again, and this can resolve on its own, basically, as miners can adapt. That didn't really happen, and the situation just got worse and worse. Late last year, after I had already decided it was bad enough to start Ocean, which was largely because of just how bad the situation had already gotten, it was discovered that several of the larger pools are actually just a proxy. They're just an ant pool under a different name. And so it turns out it wasn't 12 pools that we'd been reduced to. It was like 3 or 4 maybe. And so that just reaffirmed the need to address this urgently.
What maybe are some of the negative consequences of the consolidation or centralization of mining pools?
Well, the way the mining pools have worked for the last decade or plus has been basically where the mining pool is the real miner and everyone else who's using the pool isn't really mining. They're just they're basically selling compute as a service to the mining pool, and the mining pool is the only real miner. So in this case, we're down to like 3 or 4 miners, really. And the reason that's a problem is because the miners are the whole purpose of the miners in the system is to contribute decentralization, to prevent the double spending problem, and to make the network censorship resistant. The idea is no miner is required to take any given transaction, but if one miner doesn't take your transaction and mine it, there should be thousands, tens of thousands more other miners that will consider it. And so that way, no miner is forced to do anything specific as far as what they put in their blocks, but eventually your transaction will get in simply because there's so many miners, unless it's like complete garbage transaction, invalid or spam. And so we need to restore the decentralization of the mining side of the network for that, but also to prevent 51% attacks is what they're called, but in reality, you only need 20 to 30% of the network hash rate to make a good effort at it, where the miner can essentially go back and rewrite history. So a transaction that has confirmed may no longer be confirmed, it may actually be double spent, and the person who received those coins may no longer have them. So right now, if Antpool wanted to send you $1 billion worth of Bitcoins, you could receive that, see it get up to 6, 8 blocks confirmation, and Antpool could potentially just go back and rewrite the history so that never happened and you never got that.
So there's an aspect of blatant censorship there that we're concerned about. But so the few things I want to unpack there. The first one is hashing versus mining, or selling compute is what you said. So
Right.
how are the pools performing the job of miner, or and how is the what we would call the miners? What does it mean to sell compute? What is happening there?
Well, in the process of mining, you of course have to run a full node. That's essential to really use Bitcoin at all. But the miner uses their full node to produce a template block, which is essentially a block, but without the proof of work done on it. And so when they build this template, they decide which transactions they want to put in it, what order, not that that really matters, which transactions put in it, which transactions not to put in it. If there's a double spend of a transaction, which of the two becomes the final outcome of the spend, things like that. So right now the mining pool is doing that. They're producing the template. They're compressing the template into just a hash so the individual hashers do not even know what they're mining. It's sending the hashers that template, and the hashers are just hashing it to try to produce the proof of work that is needed to make it a complete block. Just completely oblivious to what's actually in the block.
So in essence, what we think of as miners, they're kind of selling compute, but mining is choosing what goes into the block via the block template.
Correct.
And so if I'm just selling compute and I'm not like doing the mining, and there's probably there's a lot of obvious sort of tax schemes that could be applied to that, government regulation, all things that could be layered on top of that. So we get why that's bad. How does the payout structure work though? What is why would I choose to go in and not know what's going to be in the block, and then just how am I getting paid as a miner, or what we're going to call a hasher in this case? I'm just the person selling compute power. We'll call the hasher. How does the hasher get paid in most of these big pools?
It's really independent from the separation between miners and hashers, but the way that most of these modern pools work is they just decide a price that they're willing to pay for the compute, and whatever the hasher when the hasher finds a solution that's not a full block proof of work but close to it, they'll pay the miner a certain amount for finding that, to prove that, because even though it's not a block, it still proves they're trying to find the block.
So I think it's, what is it? Is it called FPPS?
Yeah, that's the most common one these days. It stands for full pay per share.
Right. So it's like I'm gonna get $1,000 a month for my hash power, and whether the blocks produce that sort of reward or not. If it doesn't produce that much reward, then the pool will take the hit, and if it produces more, the pool gets that side.
Correct.
So, okay. So I don't.
And due to the nature of mining, there will usually be a lot of variance there. So the pool needs to maintain a large treasury of funds to cover the dry periods. And it could very well get out of control. And that's part of why a lot of these pools have become just proxies for Ant Pool, actually.
Right. And I think that's in the long lines of we've seen a pool gets too big, people voluntarily leave the pool and the pool dies. So they don't want to have the appearance of not being too big. So they just own other pools and look smaller. But something we've already stipulated is you don't need the full 51%. You know, 20 to 30% can be very disruptive to the network.
Right.
I think one of the other pros for the hashers is they get like, I think a lot of the hashers who do it this way, or you know, the investment money that comes into mining, into hash power, is very fiat based funding. So they get paid in cash, fiat. The whole deal is structured, I think, in dollars. And so they want that, and they're thinking like, I want that steady 1,000 a month. I don't want 800 one month, 1,200 the next month, and the risk and variability.
Right.
But I also want to think. So what I want to get to a little bit here is, because I think what was very surprising, you know, going into the launch of Ocean was, wow, this makes so much sense to me. We don't want the centralization of mining. Like, this is a no-brainer. And but the reaction to the launch of Ocean, externally, there was a lot of commotion over, you know, the word censorship just became the word. And it's this weird thing because Ocean's passing on the power to the miner. And I know Stratum V2 is not part of the Ocean, you know, system yet. But there is block template. Everyone knows, I think there's, you know, some block template variety here that Ocean's offering. And there's levels. And so I want to kind of just get into it a little bit more, not around it. But so giving that power to the miners brought up this conversation on censorship. And what has been your sort of take, and or how do you kind of unpack this for people? You know, here we're thinking we're giving the power to the miners, and everyone's like, well, you're taking power away, you're censoring things. What's your take there?
I think there's a lot of dishonesty in the people that call it censorship. They're really attacking the spam filtration concept, which has been part of Bitcoin since 2010.
Or any protocol.
Even before that topic took off, they were like grasping at straws, trying to find any reason to complain about Ocean. I think it's just necessarily part of being disruptive.
And what kind of, okay, what kind of things does Ocean want to filter out of block space?
Well, the design Bitcoin has had from the start is that the miners need to act as the spam filter for the network, because there will always be people trying to spam the network and attacking the network. And it's impossible for a computer to ever outwit a human. It's just, you know, if the computer has one filter, the human will just find a way around it. And so there's always necessarily been a human component to spam filtering. And so that process was kind of given to miners as their part of their job in protecting the network.
And so, yeah, the word attack, this is where I'm trying to really put some more light onto this. So what are the things that kind of belong and belongs there's a lot of loaded words here, so I'm trying to choose my words very carefully. What is Bitcoin built for? Let's put it that way. You know, it's a protocol, and we're you know, there's inputs and outputs. I'm really dumbing this down, so please forgive me, but you know, it's like some sort of throughput mechanism. What are the kind of things we're trying to put through Bitcoin or send on the protocol, like within the block space, the bucket of transactions? What belongs in there?
Yeah, at a low level, it's a consensus system, but the overarching design, the purpose for the system has been to basically create this monetary network where people mine Bitcoins and then other people have the Bitcoin, send them to someone else. And so it wouldn't really achieve its purpose if I could send your Bitcoins, for example. So that's obviously something that we always want to filter, and every node filters that easily. And there's also a lot of the spam today, they realize they can't send coins because the filters are good enough there. So they found a vulnerability that was introduced, I guess, 2 years ago now, that allowed them to just shove data in there and just increase the load on full nodes and make it really expensive for anyone else to use the network. And it really does nothing other than that.
So I think when we talk about like it makes it expensive to use the network, I think there's kind of two layers there. There's transaction fees, but then there's, I think, the deeper concept of data storage and processing maybe on the node itself.
Yeah, I counted 8 or 9 different ways that the latest spam has kind of attacking the network all at once.
So, all right, maybe coming at this from a little bit different way. How would you define spam? And I get that it's probably like porn and you know it when you see it. But I could probably start to outline porn, versus like a Mickey Mouse cartoon, like how would you start to describe spam or,
Well, generally speaking, spam is anything that the person who's getting it did not solicit it, did not consent to it. And there's some people that use Bitcoin that have consented to JPEGs or whatever, but most people, at least a lot of people, do not. And so this data is being forced on them, bypassing really the rules of the network. And they did not consent to it. They didn't solicit it. This was not part of the plan at any point. And so that's at a high level what makes it spam. To get more specific in context to Bitcoin, I would say it's just any data that does not involve in some way in the transfer of Bitcoins from one person or entity or some kind of wallet to another. So anything that isn't involved in the process for what Bitcoin is designed to do.
Right. Everything else that doesn't fit that definition would be clogging the network and ruining the experience for others, even though they can jam it through and use the network for that purpose. Now, there is sort of a monetary.
If someone wanted to if people just want to publish or share JPEGs with each other, they can do that. There are ways to do that. There's websites that do it. There's even ways to do it decentralized, BitTorrent. The only purpose of doing it the way that they are in this case is to intentionally force it on people who have not consented and explicitly do not want it.
Right. So sort of like democracy is two wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner. The two wolves are like, he's in, they're part of the vote. So, but there is a monetary aspect of this that I think is when you start looking at it from a miner, and like I said, I'm new to looking at things as a miner. I wouldn't even say I'm new to looking at things as a miner, like from like I'm mining, but like just trying to look at it from the perspective of a miner. It's a newer thing for me because it's just not been a need-based thing. And even if you read an article about mining, you can only grok it so much if you haven't walked in those shoes or you're not interested in that topic from that perspective as much as maybe looking at it from your angle, But, there's this conversation around, so like just transaction fees. So you have the block reward and you have the transaction fees and, using current consensus rules, there are things that could be clogging the network, but they could come with more short-term monetary value, or monetary value now.
It has been, even the last 2 years when the spam attack's been going on, it's been a very negligible amount, usually less than all the pool fees, which is why miners using Ocean ever more, even if they've opted to use the better spam filters. But also, even aside from that, you would hope miners have an interest in Bitcoin succeeding in the long-term value of the Bitcoins. And I know you mentioned some miners are very fiat-minded, but even if they have to report fiat gains, you would think they still have an interest in protecting the network, as opposed to a 0.1% gain in fiat.
Right. Yeah, and I try not to. I'm not speaking for. Oh, sorry.
And at the end of the day, the Bitcoin system is designed on this assumption that the majority of miners are going to be honest. If the majority of miners are not going to be honest, are not going to have the interests of Bitcoin in mind, then it's not going to work. We'd have to do something at that point to make sure that the majority miners are honest.
Right. And, I try, I definitely don't speak for miners or any, I barely can think like a first grade miner, but and my back of the envelope sort of anecdotal feedback was that the miners themselves might be altruistically mining Bitcoin or in it for Bitcoin, but their backers might not be. The where they raise capital, and so they're external partners in the project. So yeah, no, I'm sure they have that push and pull. I want to
also, even fiat-mindedly, the value of Bitcoins is presumably going to be higher if the system is a functioning system. If the system fails, the fiat value of Bitcoins is going to drop.
Right. So that's the short-term minded, high time preference versus low time preference. Don't kill the golden goose.
Yeah, I would hope even the fiat-minded investors would have an interest in that regard.
Right.
Especially when the gains from mining and spam are so small.
Thinking about, the word attack, which I just feel is very apropos for the moment. I hate to use any sort of war analogy. We're not in combat boots and using weapons, and but the analogy sometimes works. So an attack makes you think that there's sort of a sponsor and an enemy, versus the sort of line of thinking is Bitcoin is a new paradigm for humanity, a new discovery, and we're all learning about it, and we still can muck it up, and maybe even inadvertently or by mistake. But an attack seems a little bit more like someone wants it not to go a certain way, or for it to fail, whatever, or to be a different thing. What do you kind of make of that? Whether, we could discuss whether the current attack is a temporary one to set it back a day and there'll be another attack, but like, do you think is an attacker, or or how do you frame that up or think about it? Or
people who have designed the latest spam waves are definitely out to destroy Bitcoin. Some of them are even vocally admit to this. They've been interviewed and they admit that they're performing this attack. They admit it's an attack. A lot of the attack, the funding from it isn't from the attackers themselves. They've managed to find a way to gamify attacking Bitcoin. So they've got these tokens, BRC20 or whatever. There's several of them now, I think. But they've got these tokens for whatever games or gambling they want to encourage people to do. But it's not just gambling or tokens. They've created this system where instead of using their own blockchain, their own proof of work, they made it so the consensus rules are essentially prove you're attacking Bitcoin and you get this benefit, this imaginary benefit, in their game. And so they've managed to essentially con a whole bunch of people who just want to play games and have fun. They managed to trick them into covering the expenses of the attack.
And do you think that these attackers are well funded in the sense that, like they're VCs and they're trying to make a quick buck, or is this sort of like a much more long-term dynamic enemy that, is going to fight endless battles? And yeah, we have to, do what we can, and we're going to win, but like, are they that more of that kind of a thing?
There's definitely VCs that have been tricked into funding some of this stuff, but I think their long-term play is to continue the gamification of the spam. That way, it's a never-ending source of funds. People, the casinos in Vegas don't go out of business, even though people lose money there. They have fun, so they keep going back. And so by gamifying the spam, people who don't know what they're doing, people who just want to play, it's okay to them that it's an expense. They don't mind spending the money, and that's just going to continue indefinitely.
I mean, there was a great conversation between Guy Swan and Bitcoin Mechanic, and there was a quote that Guy laid down from a book he's been reading, which is to live by, to follow experts is to abandon living. And, even within, it can be very confusing, like where you're trying to figure out these issues in Bitcoin. And I think there's a lot of people who, maybe 95% of Bitcoiners don't want to care about this stuff. Whether they run their own node or not, or, they don't, and so I wonder, along the lines of, because I remember when I came in 2017, probably the third time I was touched by Bitcoin, but when I started paying attention, like it was a very confusing time with Bitcoin Cash, even, learning about shitcoins and Ethereum and proof of work and the differences between coins that were differently named, much less it got really confusing around the block size wars. And just like then as now, like my gut led me in a certain direction. I always thought like Bitcoin, and I didn't use the word pure or label it, but just like Bitcoin, real Bitcoin has to be. These other things might be, I don't understand it, but like, how could you, like, and my instinct was kind of very in that sort of, this is an immaculate conception. It's either this or nothing. But I think it's still I would imagine it's very difficult for people to come in now and think about whether this is an existential threat to Bitcoin. This current attack, and yeah, you think it is, and
especially as it's easy to look at the fees going up, the cost of the full nodes going up, and those are real problems. But also at the same time, you've got all these people coming, quote, into Bitcoin, who now believe that Bitcoin includes all these other tokens and these attacks on Bitcoin as just part of the system. And so you have a culture shift where these people influence the direction of Bitcoin going in the future, and it's a direction that's not viable. And because Bitcoin is decentralized, you can't just have a central authority say, okay, we're going to ignore all these people who have been tricked by these attackers. You can't do that. Nobody can control Bitcoin for either for good, bad or for good. So you can't just have 95% of Bitcoiners not care about how Bitcoin works. Bitcoin just won't work that way. Bitcoin, because there's no central authority, you have to have decentralized security behind it. Otherwise, you have no security at all. You don't have the 21 million limit anymore. You don't have the inability to steal. If only 5% of the network is using their own full node, nothing stops miners from stealing or inflating or any of this other nefarious stuff they could do.
Right. Are we going on the premise that if you're not running your own full node, you don't have self-custody of your sats? And
well, if there's too many people that don't run their own full node, then the system itself just falls apart. It's just a CBDC at that point, and the miners decide how much Bitcoins there are, who can spend them, who can't spend them, who can inflate, who can't. And, like they could destroy someone's coins. They could give themselves more coins. They tried to do that back in 2014, I think it was.
I think with all these conversations swirling from,
sorry. At the end of the day, Bitcoin requires that the Bitcoin users care about Bitcoin. It's just necessarily how it works.
Yeah, it seems like with all these conversations swirling around Bitcoin, I don't know if we're headed for another hard or soft fork or some sort of war over that. It it definitely with everything from Ocean and the word censorships and filtering, and then thinking about CBDCs and where the government is teetering towards. Um, this year is making me start to think a lot less. When I say optimistic, going from 100% to 99% is still a really, great position to be in compared to zero. But comparing to maybe the internet, and, at the birth of the internet, we thought it would free humanity. And, maybe it's freed a small portion of humanity, but I would say for a large swath of humanity, it's been maybe a net negative, and maybe a great tool for not freedom. Or maybe it's not as much as we hoped it could be. And the internet's still early, but that concerns me about Bitcoin. And so there's two parts to this question of what can we do? But like, so the we part I'll put on I want to talk about what you're doing. So, I mean, what's it been like bootstrapping a mining pool? We don't hear about brand new mining pools every day, or if they happen more than I hear about them, we're not hearing about other little pools or smaller pools that are trying to get started. What has this process been like from before launch to maybe after launch, till today?
For me personally, it's the technology is largely simple, at least to get it going how it was before. Since I've already done it before. Um, I mentioned Jason earlier, who I passed the pool off to previously. He's on the team, so we both have a lot of experience with running a pool and getting all this going. But also, the hard part really is getting the word out there that it exists and convincing enough miners to switch, because below 1% of the network, it's very difficult for any new miners to come over. Right now, we're finding a block on average every few days, which means the bad luck can stretch on weeks. Good luck, sometimes we'll find 3 in a day, but the bad luck really hurts a lot because it can be weeks between miners getting paid, and the miners obviously have bills they need to pay. So a lot of miners really cannot use Ocean right now simply because they have their bills, and we don't find blocks often enough to pay regularly. So the hard part is getting to that first 1% where it becomes viable for everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, with my small allocation, a small mining farm that's mining on Ocean, we're seeing that we're doing better on Ocean than not, and I can't help but think that it just has to be better for hashers. That's my instinct at looking at sort of the calculus and like looking at where the vector is and just exponentially projecting out. You're going to get the full payout, and you can see the transactions in there. So you could find out if the pool is being honest with you. I don't know how you'd want to do, business on the Bitcoin ledger without knowing how this stuff is getting calculated. I mean, it's a ledger. I mean, as an accountant by trade, I mean, it's just, it's like, duh. So,
Yeah, largely depends on how often you have to pay your electric bill. I've not seen. If you only pay your electric bill once a month, then it's probably not a big problem. You probably mine Ocean today. But apparently there's a lot of miners that actually have to pay their electric bill daily. And
oh, wow.
If you go weeks without any payouts, obviously they can't handle that right now.
Sure. No, I get the variability. And yeah, I was getting to know other miners at the Ocean launch, and people were raising those same issues. And I get how difficult it is to start a mining pool. I want to ask, like, what do you think people who aren't mining, or just they're they own some sats, they love Bitcoin, they're concerned about this issue, they run a node, or obviously if that's step one, like just run your node, run a node. But like what else would you suggest people do, or like look at or think about, question, like how can people help or be, part of that Ocean launch was a conversation, or presentation from Giacomo Zuccomo. And it was about sort of you can have 3 ways of looking at Bitcoin. and the problems facing Bitcoin, the different vectors of centralization. And you could sort of be, fatalistically complacent. It's just, everything's going to be great, pure hopium. And, game theory will always let Bitcoin win, and there's nothing I need to do. And then there's, fatalistic defeatism. Like, what are we going to do? It's, whoever's funding this is probably a state actor, and they have endless pockets, and different attack vectors will be launched, and, Bitcoin won't be what we thought it would be. And then there's, participatory optimism, which is you take action, and, you make choices, you try to make the best decisions you can and hope for the best outcomes based on the best decisions, and what do you think people can do or should do?
I know since we've launched, a number of people who weren't mining have, gone out and got a BitX or a single S19 or whatever, and have started mining, and I think that's a good step. I don't know if there really aren't very many great options for home mining. Avalon also came out with their space heater miner that seems to have picked up a little bit of a trend. Hopefully, as things progress with some of these Bitmain competitors for hardware manufacturing, maybe there will be more and better home mining options. And I don't know, maybe some of these people will get into, big time mining. Some maybe already.
A lot of people think about, technology as a sort of ever evolving thing. But there's been conversation around ossification with Bitcoin, and we touched upon it a little bit. Do you think that Bitcoin needs upgrades? Do you think that we're going to see a soft fork in the future? Maybe even a hard fork? Are these possible? Are they necessary to keep Bitcoin going? Like, do we need to keep improving Bitcoin, or should we ossify? What are your thoughts on that?
I think there's several reasons for ossify. For starters, if someone launches an altcoin that has significantly better features than Bitcoin, yes, Bitcoin has the forget the term. All the effort right now is to growing Bitcoin, but if there's something significantly better than Bitcoin, it's possible that it could displace Bitcoin's position as like the lead contender and eventually kill Bitcoin simply because it's better. So Bitcoin needs to continue upgrading to prevent that scenario. And also, if Bitcoin doesn't upgrade and there's legitimate improvement in some altcoin, it legitimizes that altcoin's ability to exist, so to speak. Right now, these altcoins are all scam coins simply because Bitcoin can just assimilate all their features. And so if Bitcoin can no longer do that, then it kind of legitimizes their existence in a sense. But also, Bitcoin as it is today is probably not scalable enough for, global adoption, which I think a lot of people want, for good reason, obviously. So I do think there's improvements needed to scale as well. And at the end of the day, if somebody wants to put new restrictions on their own coins and use their coins in a certain way, there should be a really good reason to tell them no. If we're not going to, we shouldn't be telling people they can't do something with their own money unless there's some way that it hurts someone else. And I think the default should be to accept new protocol changes unless there's a reason not to.
Yeah, and I wonder how much of, protocols always need maintenance. But like you're saying, there might be upgrades that are necessary. How censorship resistant do you think Bitcoin is today?
The 3 to 4 pools that basically make all the blocks very non-resistant. All those 3 or 4 entities have to be told is don't let Putin spend his Bitcoins, and they can accomplish that. they can block that transaction from ever happening. And the only way to avoid that scenario is by having so many miners that it's impractical to control them all.
Do you think Bitcoin's in a civil war now? Like basically a non-declared war that we don't know we're in yet, like a future block size war?
Probably. Is it a war before both sides agree that it's a war? I don't know, but there's definitely one side, attacking us that is behaving as if they're in a war.
The landscape's very different from 2017. I mean, I say like you don't know. I mean, there's a lot more UTXOs in Wall Street's hands. I'd like to think the good guys won in the block size wars. Do you think the same team would win, or what I think is the well thought out team would win in a war in 2014, or even if we fought that same war today? Do you think the landscape has changed in terms of like the users of Bitcoin? Is it less cypherpunk?
I think the situation has changed in that regard for the negative. Whether it's enough to make us lose, I don't know. Even another developer who I respect a lot, who helped us win the block size wars, for whatever reason, has completely changed his perspective and would probably not help us at this point, would probably be against us. And that's very concerning to me. Even other people who were on our side in the block size war helped us win it. Some of them have even said that the whole UASF to them was a bluff. And as a bluff, it would not have won us the war either. So that's another concern. For it to be a victory, it has to actually be a real victory. It can't just be a bluff that we get away with. And so all these things considered, I think it's going to come to a head at some point, and 2x is going to, it won't be called 2x, it won't do the same thing, but it's going to happen one way or another eventually. And we have to be ready to actually win when the enemy actually throws this at us. The last time they gave up before they even attacked, which is, I guess, why some people have decided it was a bluff. But eventually it's going to get to the point where someone tries an attack event at some point. And when that attack happens, will we be ready? I don't know. I can only hope and do what I can to prepare the situation for that inevitability.
Thinking about sort of the way the Bitcoin system is designed, beautifully, ingeniously, around incentives and incentivizing even maybe greed for positive, is this on an existential level, is this maybe a situation where money will, because people's money is on the line and their values on the line, does this make people always do the right thing in regard to that money? And that's why Bitcoin will kind of overcome these things and win, just because deep at its root, it's intrinsically built to win like that because it's designed with the right incentives? Or, does it really matter what we do as humans around the system and how we interact with it and the rules of government and how they, build layers and externalities around Bitcoin?
There's definitely a tragedy of the commons problem where, a lot of the pressure in a attempted protocol change, for example, a lot of that pressure comes from people who do not support the change, selling their coins on the forked off chain. But by doing so, you're kind of gambling that chain does not have enough support. And someone who doesn't sell their coins on either side has a potential to win regardless of which side ends up winning the battle. So there's a little bit of an incentive problem there. We already know that there's some incentive issues on the mining side, obviously. It's kind of an issue that this incentives can be adjusted like they were with SegWit and the SegWit discount. I don't know. I mean, at the end of the day, there has to be something in the protocol in that respect, but how we get to the optimal thing and prevent people from gaming it in ways that is harmful to Bitcoin is not entirely clear either.
Right. When we were at the launch of Ocean, Jack Dorsey joined you on stage, and he mentioned that, that day would be a day we'd remember for the rest of our lives. One founder to another, it was kind of interesting. What is sort of the roadmap for Ocean, and what is maybe the desired outcome for Ocean, within the Bitcoin ecosphere or ecosystem? What does that look like? And does that, where does that, does that take us, assuage a lot of these problems, or, especially in mining?
Well, we've got multiple policy options for miners to choose from. We've got a lot of educational material out there. We're breaking open the conversation about what transactions should be mined, which transactions shouldn't be mined, who makes that decision. A lot of this process is educating miners so that when we get to this next stage, which is fully shifting the block creation to the miners, so they're prepared to actually make their own decisions and decide what policies they do want to use, whether they agree with all of our recommendations or not. Hopefully everyone won't just agree with our recommendations. That would defeat the point too. So the next step there is to make it so the miners are essentially solo mining, but still sharing on the economic side with the pool. So the pool just coordinates the sharing of the payouts and doesn't do the block creation. The miners make their own blocks with their own full node. And that's getting closer. Hopefully it won't be too much longer. After that, we're planning to launch kind of a marketplace for miners to be able to not just mine these shares, these proofs of work that are not full blocks, but that's what they get paid based on. But for miners to be able to sell that to just anyone, basically. So even if people can't mine, they can still get into mining by just buying up the proofs that other miners have found. In that way, the miners can accomplish a more regular income routine, regardless of when the blocks are found, sort of like FPPS provides miners. But it's done in a decentralized way. There is no trusted liquidity provider. Anyone can buy the shares, and they could buy them right after the miner mines them, essentially doing the FPPS on a decentralized level. Or they could wait and buy shares that have been in the share log for half their expected lifetime, and the miner's there's already been a few blocks found with those payouts, and there's a lot of different ways this could go in the market. But at the end of the day, the idea is to have this all decentralized. We're not going to be a middleman. The buyers of the proofs will send the miners payments directly over Lightning. We just observe it, that they've been paid, and that's when the proof gets transferred to the buyer. And so by decentralizing all these things, hopefully we go beyond just saving Bitcoin, but also improving it on that side. At the same time, this only addresses decentralization on the mining side. It doesn't address people using their own full nodes. That remains an unsolved issue for Bitcoin. It's kind of outside the scope of Ocean to solve that. Obviously, I'm still working on that. Not in my official capacity for Ocean, but just working on Bitcoin itself. A lot of that is really educating users, making it easier for users to use their own full node. And it's a much harder problem to solve than the mining centralization issue, I think.
What would be, would Ocean grow to 20% or 30%? Could it? Would that be healthy?
As long as we get the next stage, decentralized mining, where the miners make their own blocks first. Yeah. In that case, even it's probably never going to happen. But even if like 100% of the network was using Ocean, they would still all be making their own blocks. So it would be fine for Bitcoin.
Yeah, it sounds like really, if you're mining, I would want to make my own block. Sounds kind of cool. How did you guys come up with the name?
That was actually an interesting. We were planning initially to launch it with the original name Eligius again, simply because everyone knows the name Eligius, the brand. And maybe not everyone, but a lot of the old time miners who are developed into this industry in the first place. But it was actually Jack that pointed out to me and us that nobody knows how to pronounce it or spell it. So it kind of got us thinking and went back to the drawing board on names. Do we really want to use a name that people can hear and not know how to spell? And even if they know how to spell it, not know how to pronounce it. And like all of us pronounce it differently. So we spent, like not constantly, but over the course of several weeks, we were brainstorming ideas of what other names might be a good name. And I eventually came to the idea that, call it a mining pool, but pools, like swimming pools, are very permissioned. You have to have permission to go swimming in the pool, and we're aiming at a permissionless thing. Why don't we just call it like contrast? You got permission swimming pool, but we're the permissionless wide open ocean. Anyone can just swim. You don't need to, pay an entry fee or whatever. And a lot of people liked the name. Ran it by some friends and family, and it seemed like a good, very easily marketable name.
Right. That's great. Are Bitcoiners not thinking about this adversarially enough? Do we have a problem in Bitcoin culture?
It seems like it. I think a lot of more Bitcoiners understand the situation than the miners. There are miners who understand, obviously, but it seems to be a much lower percent than overall Bitcoiners. Somehow, a lot of miners just, as you mentioned, don't seem to pay much attention to Bitcoin itself.
Right. I mean, I'm touched upon this a little bit earlier, but why do you think you work so hard or spend so much of your time and efforts, on Bitcoin as a, someone who works on core and other aspects of Bitcoin and is community supported, which the reason I include that top of the show is I know how hard it is to get communities to actually support, Bitcoin core developers. I think people hear that and they think, oh, it's a done deal, like an advertising deal with Nike, And so why is it so important for you to be working on Bitcoin? What does Bitcoin mean to you?
Well, like I said, as for the last 5 years now or so, it's been kind of essential, just to the future of civilization. I don't think the dollar is going to last much longer, and none of the other currencies have much hope. It feels like if we're going to have a situation where people can really live in an economic sense, we're going to have to make Bitcoin work. And unfortunately, I don't think we have nearly enough developers, certainly not focused on what actually matters. So I kind of feel like, as far as why do I spend so much time on it, I feel like I have to. Nobody else is, well, not nobody, but way too few people are spending this kind of time working on what Bitcoin needs to succeed.
Right. It must give you such interesting perspective. As you were saying before, we all gain our own perspectives, but the experiences we have drive that, and hopefully eliminate some of our blind spots. And they probably create new ones, though, Thinking about, this maybe silent war that we're in, I can't help to think it's that, the way I frame it up is sort of, self-custody, or who has the UTXOs versus, number go up. So, and I think they work hand in hand. They're going to take away self-custody and give you number go up is sort of what I mean. Through the ETFs and centralization and sort of what the little attacks the government is doing and just pushing everyone towards, more custodial type situations. That's what I see. I see that this sort of spam attack is sort of one small aspect of that larger war. And
Right.
it's even if it's needling, it's just poking and needling, and then this thing it's like death by 1,000 cuts. And I think if a lot of people get lulled to sleep, it's sort of like the mosquito gives you a little numbing agent while it's biting you so that it can get its job done. It's like, here, numbers going up, everything's great. Bitcoin will survive no matter what you do, So I guess my final question for you, and was technology a mistake? Like all of it, and what if they turn Bitcoin against us,
Yeah, I've thought about that. But what is the alternative? If we didn't have Bitcoin, we'd just have nothing in the first place. So I don't know that it could really be any better than if we didn't have Bitcoin. It could only be worse.
Yeah, I mean, even if Bitcoin is not every single thing it could be, it'd be orders of magnitude better than fiat.
As long as we make it succeed, yeah. But even if Bitcoin doesn't succeed, I don't think we're any worse off than if Bitcoin never existed.
Right. Yeah. Luke, this has been an incredible conversation. I'm sure there's tons of technical aspects we didn't get to, but I really feel like we covered, conceptually what I was aiming for. One of the things I found interesting about Ocean is it has a clause that the company could do no harm to Bitcoin. It's sort of like second level to a Bitcoin standard.
Well, I've always been hesitant to, I don't know if that's the right word, but suspicious of capitalism and its obligation of companies to always serve the shareholders' profit first. So that's why I want to make sure that no matter what happens with Ocean, I didn't want it to become an enemy of Bitcoin. I didn't want it to go the way of Bitmain, even if it was profitable to do so. I didn't want it to go the way of Coinbase and go, full scam coin. So that's why it was important to make sure that Bitcoin's interests are up right above companies' profits.
Wow, that's amazing. I love the foresight, and sort of the ethical approach. So this has been so dope. Luke, I'll leave it to you for any parting words, to let people know where they can find you, your work, and, obviously Ocean.
Sure. As far as finding me, I'm pretty active on Twitter these days, even though it's not called Twitter for some dumb reason. Just LukeDashjr. Unfortunately, there's a bunch of impersonators, but hopefully mine is easy enough to spell. I wouldn't trust. I do have a Telegram account, but I wouldn't trust it. There's definitely impersonators trying to scam people under my name there. Yeah, I don't know what else there would be. Ocean has a Discord, which people can join, where there's a somewhat lively chat community. That's a good way to just talk with not only myself, but also other people who work on Ocean and other miners who use Ocean as well.
Yeah, that's an exciting group. They chat all day long. I could barely keep up. It's all day, every day Ocean. But I do love the Ocean. So this has been awesome. Thank you so much, Luke. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Today's episode with Luke Dashjr is brought to you by River, preferred choice for buying Bitcoin. Get up to $100 when you sign up and buy Bitcoin at river.com/matrix. You can also support the Bitcoin Matrix podcast with a boost on the Fountain app and by writing a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. That would really help me get the word out and help new listeners to find the show. And most of all, thank you for tuning in. Keep building, keep stacking, and always be laser focused out there. This is Cedric. Peace.